Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a massive stack of notes on the desk today, and honestly, if you are a fan of high-stakes geopolitical drama, this is going to be your Super Bowl. But I want to give a very specific shout out right at the top to the learner.
Specifically, the ones drowning in revision notes right now.
Exactly. If you are out there prepping for your IBDP history exams, grab a pen. This is practically tailor-made for you. We aren't just reciting dates today. We are doing the hard work of evaluation. We're taking the U.S. policy of containment, and we are issuing a report card.
Which is really the core of historical analysis. It's not enough to know what happened. You have to ask, was it successful? And, success is a really tricky word.
Right, because success for a general in the Pentagon is going to look very different from success for a taxpayer in Ohio.
Or for a citizen in the country where the proxy wars actually happen.
Precisely. So, our mission today is to grade containment across, 3 decades. We're going to look at military effectiveness, political outcomes, the economic costs. We're going to see if this strategy was a masterstroke that saved the free world, or maybe a clumsy series of disasters that we're still paying for.
Let's set that scene. Post-World War II, the big idea is containment. Keep the Soviet Union in its box, stop communism from spreading.
But the sources we're looking at today, especially the work by historian Warren Cohen, they suggest that what we think of as containment actually went through this massive personality transplant around 1950.
That is the pivot point.
Yeah.
If you're writing an essay on this, 1950 is your golden date. Before that, containment was largely political and economic. Think the Marshall Plan.
Right. Sending money to rebuild Europe so they wouldn't vote communist. It was a wallet war.
Exactly. And then June 1950 happens, the Korean War. Warren Cohen argues this didn't just heat up the Cold War, it fundamentally mutated it. It went from a political competition to an ideologically driven, militarized conflict.
So we go from let's outspend them to let's outgun them.
And let's fight them everywhere. This is the globalization of the Cold War. It's not just about Berlin anymore. It was about the survival of, the entire non-communist world. And the blueprint for this shift has a very boring name, but explosive consequences. NSE 68.
National Security Council Report 68.
It sounds like a tax form, but it was a revolution. It recommended tripling the U.S. defense budget.
Tripling.
Tripling. It militarized the whole economy. But here is the paradox, and this is crucial for understanding the 1950s. President Eisenhower comes in, and he's a fiscal conservative. He sees this exploding budget, and he wants to balance the books. So how do you triple your military power while cutting costs?
You buy cheaper weapons.
You buy nukes. Eisenhower actually cut conventional forces, soldiers, tanks, ships, and went all in on nuclear deterrence. It was called the New Look.
Which creates that terrifying strategy we all know as brinkmanship.
Right. Because if you cut your army, you can't fight a small, limited war. Your only option, if the enemy pushes you, is to threaten massive nuclear retaliation. You have to push every crisis to the brink of disaster to make the other guy back down.
It's high-stakes poker where the chips are cities.
And we see this play out immediately in Asia. The U.S. starts building this fortress ring around the communist bloc, a literal chain of alliances.
You have the treaty with Japan in 52, SEATO in 54.
Right, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. But the most dramatic example of this new militarized containment has to be Taiwan. The U.S. did a complete 180 on this island.
It's one of the sharpest U-turns in diplomatic history, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, look at the record. January 1950, President Truman was done with the Chinese Civil War. He explicitly said the U.S. had no desire to get involved with Formosa, that's Taiwan. He said the U.S. had no intention of utilizing its armed forces to protect it.
Basically, good luck, you're on your own.
And then Korea happens. The whole lens shifts. Suddenly, Taiwan isn't just an island, it's an unsinkable aircraft carrier. By 1953, the U.S. is pouring aid into Jiang Zemi's regime and recognizing Taiwan as the only legitimate China.
Which is wild. They just pretended the mainland, with hundreds of millions of people, didn't exist diplomatically.
And Mao Zedong, of course, wasn't going to let that slide. This leads to the Taiwan Strait crises. In 54, and again in 58, the PRC starts shelling these tiny islands, Quemoy and Matsu.
These islands are essentially rocks, right? But the symbolism was huge.
Huge. And Eisenhower's response, he didn't send a few ships, he went straight to brinkmanship. Congress passed the Formosa Resolution, giving him a blank check to use force, and he publicly threatened to use nuclear weapons against mainland China.
He threatened to nuke China over some rocks.
He threatened to nuke China to maintain the credibility of containment. And you know what? It worked. China backed down.
So let's fill out the report card for this section. Containment in Asia, the Taiwan chapter. How do we grade it?
Well, if the rubric is keep Taiwan non-communist, it's an A. They secured a defense treaty. Taiwan stayed independent and eventually became a prosperous democracy.
But there's always a but.
But look at the strategic cost. The U.S. locked itself into a perpetual standoff that is still a major flashpoint today. They completely isolated China for 2 decades. And historians like John Lewis Gaddis point out that the U.S. was played
Played by who?
by Jiang Jiechi. He knew he could manipulate the Americans. He'd claim his government was about to collapse just to drag the U.S. deeper into the conflict and get more money.
So a tactical win, but a diplomatic trap.
Exactly.
All right, let's move south. Because if Taiwan was a standoff, Vietnam was a tragedy. This is the centerpiece of any IBSA on containment, right? But how did we get from no desire to be involved to 500,000 troops on the ground?
It's the domino theory. The belief that if Vietnam fell, the rest of Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, maybe even India would just topple over.
And it started with a checkbook, not with soldiers.
That's right. Initially, the U.S. was just funding the French colonial war. They paid for 80% of the French war effort. But when the French lost at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the U.S. had a choice to make.
The Geneva Accords split the country. They were supposed to have elections in 1956 to reunite it. So, democracy, right? That's what we're fighting for.
Well, the U.S. realized that if those elections happened, Ho Chi Minh would win in a landslide. He was the national hero who'd just beaten the French. So the U.S. backed the cancellation of the elections and supported the creation of a separate state in the South under Diem.
So we canceled democracy to save it from communism.
That is the essential irony. And Diem was a difficult ally. I mean, his regime was corrupt, unpopular, violent, but he was anti-communist. And from there, you just get the escalation ladder. Kennedy sends advisors. Johnson uses the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to send combat troops.
I want to focus on the so what factor here, the cost, not just in lives, which were immense, but the economic impact on the U.S. itself was just staggering.
It broke the bank. By 1967, the war was costing $2 billion a month.
$2 billion a month in 1960s money.
And it had a direct victim at home. President Johnson had this vision. He wanted to build the Great Society, eradicate poverty, fix education, ensure civil rights. It was a hugely ambitious domestic agenda.
But you can't have both.
Economists call it guns versus butter. You can't pay for a massive war and a massive social safety net at the same time. Vietnam killed the Great Society. It triggered severe inflation and wrecked the U.S. economy for a decade.
And it wrecked social trust, too. We have to talk about the credibility gap.
Oh, absolutely. The government was telling the public, we're winning, the costs are manageable. But the reality on the TV screens every night told a completely different story. The body counts were rising, the costs were exploding.
And the draft.
The draft was the accelerant. It was widely seen as unfair because, well, it was. If you were wealthy and in college, you got a deferment. If you were working class or minority, you went to the jungle. This fueled the massive protests, the draft card burnings, all the social upheaval.
And then 1968, the Tet Offensive.
The turning point. Militarily, the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces actually repelled the attack and inflicted huge casualties on the North. But politically, it was a disaster. It proved to the American public that the enemy was nowhere near defeated.
So Johnson bows out. Nixon comes in with peace with honor.
Which involved expanding the war into Cambodia and Laos while slowly pulling U.S. troops out. We know the end result. The Paris Peace Accords in '73 and the fall of Saigon in '75.
So looking at our report card, Vietnam, is this just a straight F?
In terms of the specific objective keeping South Vietnam non-communist, it is an absolute undeniable failure. Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia all fell to communist regimes.
However, I have seen some revisionist takes on this.
There is a counterintuitive argument that is really worth noting, especially for a history student looking for that nuance. It comes from Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of modern Singapore.
What was his take on it?
He argued that while the war was a tragedy for Vietnam, it actually bought time for the rest of the region. He believed that the American resistance held the line just long enough for countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore to stabilize their economies and put down their own internal insurgencies.
So the argument is, we lost the patient, but we saved the hospital.
In a grim geopolitical sense, yes. The dominoes stopped falling after Indochina. Whether that was because of the war or just coincidence is debated, but Lee Kuan Yew firmly believed the U.S. effort prevented a total collapse of Southeast Asia.
That is a fascinating, if a bit cold, perspective. Okay, let's hop across the ocean. We have to look at the Western Hemisphere because containment wasn't just an away game. It was happening right in the backyard.
90 miles off the coast of Florida, Cuba.
1959, Fidel Castro takes power. And this really panicked Washington, didn't it?
It completely shattered the assumption that the Americas were a safe zone.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have a Soviet-aligned government right on the doorstep.
And the response was messy.
Messy is a good word. First, economic sanctions. Then, the Bay of Pigs invasion in '61, a CIA-sponsored disaster. And then, the big one, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
The closest we ever came to World War III.
The Soviets put nukes on the island. The U.S. blockaded it. We know the resolution. Soviets took the missiles out, and the U.S. promised not to invade Cuba.
So how do we grade containment in Cuba?
It's a mixed bag. Did they roll back communism? No. Castro stayed in power for decades.
Yeah.
But did they contain it? Yes. Communism didn't spread from Cuba to take over the Caribbean. The U.S. successfully isolated the island.
But if we want to talk about the methods of containment, we have to look south to Chile. Because this wasn't about missiles and blockades. This was about economics and shadows.
This is a crucial case study for understanding how far the U.S. was willing to go. In 1970, Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile.
And it's important to note he was democratically elected.
He was. But he was a Marxist. He wanted to nationalize industries, including copper mines owned by U.S. corporations. The Nixon administration was furious. They didn't send in the Marines. They decided to, in Nixon's own words, make the economy scream.
That phrase always sticks with me, make the economy scream.
It meant cutting off aid, blocking loans from international banks, and having the CIA fund opposition groups and media to create chaos and instability.
And it worked.
In 1973, there was a military coup. Allende died in the presidential palace, and General Augusto Pinochet took power.
Now, Pinochet was definitely not a communist.
Far from it. He was a right-wing military dictator. He dismantled democracy, suspended civil rights, and his regime is infamous for the torture and disappearances of thousands of political opponents.
So grading this is complicated.
Politically, the U.S. chalked it up as a win. They removed a Soviet-aligned socialist and installed a pro-U.S. ally. They protected U.S. business interests.
But the moral cost.
The moral cost was the destruction of a democracy and the support of a brutal dictatorship. If your definition of success includes promoting freedom, Chile is a failing grade. It really highlights that containment was often about anything but communism, regardless of the alternative.
We see that same pattern in our final stop, Africa, the Congo.
The Congo crisis of the 1960s. This is often overlooked, but it was a major flashpoint. The Congo gets independence from Belgium and immediately falls into chaos.
You have Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. He's trying to hold the country together. He asks the West for help, gets the cold shoulder, and then turns to the Soviets.
And that was the fatal mistake in the eyes of Washington. They didn't see a desperate nationalist, they saw a Soviet puppet. So the CIA got involved, they supported his rivals, Lumumba was assassinated.
And eventually a man named Mobutu takes power.
Mobutu Sese Seko. He established what's known as a kleptocracy government by theft. He looted the country's wealth for decades while his people lived in poverty. But, and this is the key for our report card, he was staunchly anti-communist. He kept the Soviets out of Central Africa.
So once again, a short-term geopolitical win, a long-term disaster for the people living there.
That is the recurring theme, isn't it?
Okay, we've toured the globe. Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Cuba, Chile, the Congo. We've looked at the budget sheets and the body counts. If you are that IB student sitting in the exam hall needing to write that concluding paragraph, how do you synthesize all this? What is the final verdict?
It is a study in contradictions. You absolutely have to separate the geopolitical outcome from the domestic and moral costs.
Break that down for us.
If success simply means preventing the Soviet Union from dominating the globe and maintaining the U.S. as a superpower, then on those terms, containment worked. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed. The global balance of power held.
The patient survived.
Exactly. But if success includes consistency with democratic values, economic stability at home, or establishing stable free nations abroad, the record is much, much darker.
We traded long-term stability for short-term wins. We supported dictators in Chile and the Congo to stop communists. We broke the U.S. economy and social trust over Vietnam.
You could say the U.S. won the geopolitical chess match, but they knocked over a lot of the pieces and broke the board in the process.
That is a powerful image. We won the game, but broke the board.
But that leads to the final thought I think listeners should chew on.
What's that?
History doesn't stop when the chapter ends. We are still living in the wreckage of some of those decisions.
Right. When we look at the global south today, Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia, and we see this lingering distrust of Western intervention,
We have to ask, how much of that is the interest compounding on the debt we incurred during containment? Are we still paying the price for the successes of 1954 or 1973?
It's a question worth asking. That's it for this deep dive. Good luck with your studies. Keep questioning the narrative, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.